Welcome to ACOP Ministry Mind Leadership Podcast, where we talk to leaders across our fellowship with the purpose of building connection and engagement. I'm Kim Cooper, your host and ACOP Next Gen Catalyst. Join with me each episode to hear stories that will challenge and encourage you in your ministry journey. This episode, we will hear from Sinanan, a youth pastor and program director for Street Invaders. Listen in and hear how she dug down deep, sought creativity, and saw success through some difficult circumstances. Hey, so welcome to our all new Ministry Mind podcast. We're glad that you're joining us today. So Ministry Mind podcast, you ask, what is this? Well, this is a new podcast that we are launching with ACOP for leaders such as yourself. We want this to be a place for leaders that you can feel connected and encouraged, and you can find a place of belonging. Each episode, we are going to interview and meet some amazing leaders from across our fellowship and across our country. We're going to find out who they are, and we're going to find out about what God's doing in and through them, where they live and serve. So we hope that you are inspired and encouraged by today's episode, and that you continue to follow along with us with the Ministry Mind podcast. So, my name is Kim Cooper, and I am the Next Gen Catalyst with ACOP, and I have the privilege of interviewing a wonderful young lady that I have known for many, many years. Today, we are interviewing Sarah Sinanan, used to be Sarah Fenn, and we're excited to have you today. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to listen to this podcast.
Well, good. I'm excited that you get to be my first interview. So, Sarah, tell us a little bit about you. Let's start off with, tell us something silly or funny or unique about yourself that maybe these listeners wouldn't know.
Well, okay, so this is really just random. It's the first thing that came to my though. I don't even know if everybody my age would know who this is, but my favorite singer when I was a kid, like 4 or 5, was Neil Diamond. No joke. I love Neil Diamond. I had the Greatest Hits CD. It's what my mom played for me. Like, she didn't play the kids' music for me.
There was no salty. No salty. No, so you probably don't even know what that was.
No, I just listened to Neil Diamond. So for my 4th birthday party, we actually played musical chairs to Neil Diamond's Greatest Hits because that's what I loved. So there's a fun fact.
That is a fun fact. Well, Sarah, where do you live these days?
I am in Calgary, Alberta. I've been here for a long time. Did a short stint in Eston, but other than that, I've been living here for my whole life. So
wow. So Sarah, tell us a little bit about what you do. Tell us, what your ministry roles look like. What do you do for a job? Tell us about that.
So I am the youth director at Calgary Full Gospel Church. I've been working at the church for about 3 years, but I've been doing that role for about 1.5 years now. And I also do some work with the worship there. I'm also the Street Invaders program coordinator. So I do all the admin for Street Invaders and help run the program. And I've been involved with Street Invaders for many, many years. I think this is my 11th year, but I've been involved for about 5 years with admin, and this year is my first year doing all year. And as well, I am on the Next Gen team for ACOP. So with Kim, which has been lots of fun. And so I get to do ministry in a few different places, lots of work with youth, and Yeah,
it sounds like 4 jobs, actually. How do you get it all done?
It was even worse last year when I was planning a wedding and still in school. That was
wow.
So this year actually feels like a break a bit.
That's scary. So you mentioned planning a wedding. Tell us a bit about that. You're a newlywed.
Yes, newly married, April 25th. We got married at the height of COVID. We had to put tape on the ground to make sure everybody stayed 2 meters apart. We could only have 15 people there. But it's been good, definitely challenging. If there was any question whether or not we should get married, it definitely came up.
Oh man. Oh
There's
man,
so
I have felt so bad for all those planning weddings and that sort of thing during COVID. What a crazy time we have just lived through.
it's so wild. I mean, there were so many things that were cool that came out of it, though. To be able to get married, like the day we got married, I remember we were walking around in downtown, getting pictures taken afterwards, and
Yeah.
everyone was honking at us and so excited because they're so excited to see something like good happening, especially in
Right.
April when everyone was in lockdown. So
Yeah, I
yeah.
appreciate that you have that perspective shift where you're able to go, yeah, that wasn't ideal, but here's what was awesome about it. Because
Mm.
isn't that so true that, you know, it's through some of the hardest times that some of our most growth or our biggest inspirations or creativity has to click in and take over so that we can get through it. That's awesome. So, talking about that, talking about COVID and the craziness that you have been through in this last year, tell us a little bit about how you've been creative with your job, with being a youth pastor in this time. I'm sure that there's going to be lots of youth pastors and pastors that will listen to this podcast and they've been through this, they've been struggling through this as well. But maybe there's something that you can share that you've done, that you've felt, that you've led, that will encourage those that listen to this podcast. So tell us a little bit about, you know, where you were at with being a youth pastor through this season and maybe some ways that you were creative.
Yeah, I mean, it's been crazy. I remember the week before everything shut down, we had an untalent show, and we had hand sanitizer, and we were all like, okay, don't get too close to each other. We're not going to share snacks. But even then, it didn't seem like a big deal. Like it was still kind of. And then the next week, everything shut down, and we had to get on Zoom and figure out all of that. And it was yeah, huge switch. But I think like the biggest thing me and my leaders learned in this time, and what we really felt especially at the beginning when we were only on Zoom, we couldn't see each other in person at all, was that as valuable as like a great curriculum is, or a cool game, as good as those things are, the thing that everyone was really missing was just connection. And
Mm-hmm.
that being able to walk with people as the
Right.
body of Christ. And so we had to get really creative in those ways. Like even in the summer, we met way more than we normally would in the summer, just because we saw an opportunity to be outside, to actually be in person with the kids,
Yeah.
even if that meant sitting in a park for a couple of hours and chatting and hearing how they're doing. And, you know, I think another thing we've had to be creative with is we've never had such a spectrum of opinions on this, where there's some students and parents who are like, this doesn't, like, we're fine, let's just go back to normal. And then we
Right.
have students who literally haven't come out of lockdown since March. So even just thinking, how do we not just put on one event where we do one thing and say we've checked off the box of doing youth ministry, but thinking
Right.
like, okay, for these kids, we're going to go and sit on their lawn for an hour. Or for these kids, we're going to run an online Bible study. But for these kids, we're going to meet in a park, and getting creative about how to reach different kids in different ways. So
Yeah, and
yeah.
having to adjust, like you mentioned, coping with parents and different expectations and different levels of fear, and comfortability with being in groups and stuff. That's all stuff that you have had to navigate with your leaders. So how, this is just a side question that I thought about. How have you supported your leaders and your volunteers through this time? How did you engage them? Because it sounds like a lot of work. You've done a lot of work and you have a lot of roles right now. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously you couldn't be doing all this connection on your own. How did you engage your leaders and help kind of pastor them into pastoring your kids?
Yeah, I have to hand it to my leaders. Like, I mean, across both jobs with Street Invaders and with the youth group, but I'll focus on the youth group. They just stepped right up. Like
Yeah.
they were so helpful. Last month, I took each of them out individually just to talk about how this has gone and
Yeah.
what they liked and what they didn't like. And yeah, it's just been a lot of like we've never had such an active group chat in our as leaders, because we're dealing with parents, we're dealing with the bylaws. Like at the beginning of August, we had to start thinking, okay, we have to wear masks for everything now in Calgary.
Right.
How do we do that? And so it's been a lot of like just constant conversation, way more time with my leaders even than with the youth. Just pouring into them, hearing what they're dealing with, what they're feeling, and even their creativity, because alone I just like you said, I don't have the capacity to do it. And
No.
as well, just I don't have the capacity to reach all of the kids. So
Right.
it's been a real shift for me even to focus on way more time with the leaders so that they can go out for sure.
Absolutely. And so to do the work that you are called to do, you need to have strong leaders around you. And that sounds like you've done a really good job at that. So here's another question that I would throw at you. How are you caring for yourself in this time? What are some things that you're doing to make sure like you're actively engaging other leaders to support the vision of your youth ministry? But how are you caring for you? How are you doing that soul care, that time management, that kind of thing? Like, what are some tips or strategies that stick out to you that you would like to share with our listener today?
Yeah, I think especially at the beginning of COVID, I was really bad at that. And I think even the last couple of weeks, I've found myself slipping back into like, I just got to do it and we'll get it done. But I think I've made really clear lines with myself, like, okay, after this time, I'm not going to text about work or take calls about work. And I'm just going to rest and focus on me and not think about if this is going to work tomorrow. I'll deal with that tomorrow. And I think just being really honest with some of my leaders who are like right under me, who are, able to take a week without me there, about how I'm doing. If I need you to step up this week, or hey, I just am completely out of ideas. Do you have any? And to actually reach out and be vulnerable when I need to be honest. And as well, just having good accountability with the people above me as well.
Right.
And for them to be able to say, okay, Sarah, you got to stop and take a break. It's
Good.
been really good for sure.
Yeah, the first thing you mentioned kind of made me tweak and go, yeah, you know what? I actually have never done this until just in the last couple of months, but I actually put the setting on my phone that after 10 p.m., my phone's on silent. I don't get any notifications, because I would go to bed at 10:30, and all of a sudden I'd still be getting notifications, partly because I lead a team that's, in different provinces and stuff. But it had never crossed my mind to do that and to be okay with that. And it has been really good for me, because I don't get those notifications until 7:00 the next morning. Simple things that we don't think will make a big impact, but really end up doing that. Another thing I know that you've done, because it's part of the initiative that you and I have with our next gen, our ACOP Next Gen lead team, is something that we've started called Ministry Mind Groups. So this is our Ministry Mind podcast, but we've also got Ministry Mind groups. And so do you want to share just briefly what you did to reach out to some other youth pastors? Because I think that that's probably helped you to get through this season too, is that you talked about everyone's wanting connection. And I'm assuming that probably you and your peers are feeling that way as well. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was huge. I had, even before COVID, had kind of reached out to a few youth pastors I knew in the city and just said, like, let's get together, let's talk. Yeah, like, let's have this Ministry Mind time just of accountability and togetherness. And out of that even came, we made a group chat, and during COVID, we would send each other like ideas for games, especially when we were all on Zoom. We would just send, like, this is what we did on Zoom this week. You guys could try it out. And that was a huge relief, because coming up with games and things like that was so hard. That kept kids engaged. So having, and then even just having other youth leaders praying for me as well, and me praying for them. And then as well with Brian Carswell, he started a group with Eston, people that I'd gone to school with, where we could just have an open conversation about how we were doing and pray for each other. We even prophesied over each other. We would just, and that was so life-giving for me, for sure, to have from my peers as well. Support was so great from both of those places. So absolutely. And that was something that got birthed with our next gen lead team, because
my husband had been a part of a pastor mind group where it was kind of that peer mentorship and accountability. And so we got this idea. And so it's just something that is grassroots and we're just getting started with it. But there has been a couple of Ministry Mind groups that have been started and we've been hearing great things. So we are believing and trusting that God is going to grow that so that there's more connection and sense of belonging and just that camaraderie in ministry, because it can be so lonely. Even to those that have been in ministry for years, you go through seasons where you just feel so alone. So that's really good. Thanks for sharing about that. The last thing I wanted to talk with you about today and wanted you to share is how you guys have been creative and addressed street invaders during COVID, because you and I are on the senior leadership of Street Invaders, and the difficult decision had to be made whether we were going to go ahead with our physical program or if we were going to cancel it for this year. And we had a couple meetings and some intense time of prayer and fasting, trying to decide what on earth are we going to do. And the decision was made that we would cancel the programs for this year. And that was so hard to do. However, I was so impressed with you and the team at the head office, because you did not let that stop you from saying, okay, yeah, we're not going to do this physical program on location in, our different boot camps, but we're going to make this happen. We have to make this happen. And so in my mind, I was like, but how? Like, how are you going to do this? I just could not wrap my brain around it. So I wanted you to come on today and just share some of the ideas, some of the struggles, some of the inspiration, and some of the amazing stories that came from this year's Street Invaders in a Box and Street Invaders Online. So take us through what happened from your perspective and share with us some insight and stuff that maybe will encourage those listening today.
Yeah, so we just canceled the program. I was sitting in my apartment because that was where I was at. I was working from home every day at the time. And I was like, man, what are we going to even do this summer? Like, what am I going to, I'm just going to do admin, I guess. But I just graduated from university this year. And so I had this box that, because obviously my grad got canceled, that they sent me with my degree and my hat and all the things like that. It was like this really good way to, obviously it would have been nice to have graduated and walked the stage. It still felt real to get, it was really nice. And I was looking at this box on my couch and I was like, we could do Street Invaders in a Box. And when I started thinking about it, I was like, oh, this could actually be really cool, because we could have different people from different provinces involved and so on and so forth. So I started, coming up with this idea. And then I found out that Sunrise Church was thinking about running some sort of mission thing this summer with their youth. And I was like, whoa, how cool would this be if we could send this box to churches? And it kind of grew from there. And at first we were like, okay, we're going to make this, we're going to do it for each province. We're going to do, and that felt kind of overwhelming and big. And then we're thinking, but what if we brought all the provinces together and brought these churches together? And it just kind of, people started getting excited about it, and we didn't even know what it would look like yet. We didn't know if we were going to run something online or what. We just knew we were going to have a box and Street Invaders was going to be in it. So that's really where it was birthed from. And then
you were kind of building the airplane as you were taking off.
Yeah. Oh, the whole time, even when we were promoting it at first, we were like, we don't even know what we're promoting yet. We don't even know what we're telling people to sign up for. Like
true Street Invaders way.
Yeah, seriously.
It's in our DNA.
I remember sending out the first proposal and it was like 8 pages long, and it was like, well, we could do this or this or maybe this, and just it became more and more. But eventually we kind of brought it down to this idea of Street Invaders at home, where either churches could run it from their church or students could jump online with us and do it in that way. And yeah, it was it was great. So that's kind of where the inspiration came from, was a box on my couch, and we thought, let's bring all the provinces together and do something online and empower the churches. So
yeah, that's awesome. So when you started to like roll that out in your head, God kind of tweaked your creativity with like, oh, we could take this and we could do this. And as it started rolling out, what were some of the things that came to your mind that were like lies that the enemy was like, nope, you can't do that, or this isn't going to work, or like, what were some of those things that were potentially going to hold you back?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was just that nobody will want this. Like, none of the leaders are gonna jump on board. We're not gonna have any students. None of the churches are gonna run this. Even if churches want to run this, their students aren't gonna come.
Yeah.
And that was, and even just, there was definitely moments, even when we were far into it, whereas like, we can't do this. It won't work.
Right.
I can't do it. I don't have the capacity.
Right.
So those were like definitely the biggest lies, just that there would be no space or no one who would want to join in, which ended up being such a lie.
So how did you, tell me, how did you work through that? How did you and the Lord work through those feelings of like defeat or inadequacy, or just like, how am I going to do, like, how are we going to do this? How are we actually going to make this idea come to fruition?
Yeah, I think there's kind of three things. One was just definitely me being intentional about, like, one thing I really feel like the Lord has been teaching me in this season is that my ministries are not about me or how well I'm reflected, but rather about it's about Him. And it's so simple, but it's funny how quickly we get in our way. I know I've done this over and over the last 6 months, where I'm like, well, if I'm not performing to a certain level, then people won't want to be involved. When truly it's about just making room for people to meet Holy Spirit.
Wow.
And so sorry?
That's huge. That is so huge, because isn't that exactly what we do, is we switch back into our own strength and our own capacity, and we're relying and we're like going and pushing hard, and we need to just release it. It's interesting that you bring that up, because Greg and I were just talking about that on our Together Wednesday. How, what do you need to release to God today? Like, what's troubling you? What are you trying to take on in your own strength?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we talked about this week. So isn't that so cool that how God does that, right? Okay, so tell me, like, you've told us how you overcame that. So tell us just a snippet of what actually then transpired. Like, tell us from your view what actually transpired from that little idea sitting in your living room to a full-fledged like online program that you've never run before, you've never had experience doing. Like, how did that come, and what transpired?
Yeah, I think once I kind of got past myself, a big second step was getting the people on board who I knew would be passionate about this. And really, they were a huge thing that pushed this forward too. And I couldn't have done it without them. And another huge godsend for us was we had some interns come to the office. So they came, they started running the admin. So then I could really run with the other leaders who were kind of pushing this forward. And we were able to just sit down and be like, okay, what is important about Street Invaders? What do we want to prioritize? And the thing that kind of came out of that was, okay, we want students to feel empowered that they can live on mission at home and that they can encounter Holy Spirit right in their room. And so from there, we started coming up with, okay, what are the classes we want to teach then? Or who are the teachers and leaders we want to get involved? And so then we came up with a schedule. We were like, okay, we're going to run this for 2.5 days. That's how long we think we can do this online without it becoming too long or too much. And then we started picking, okay, what are the best parts about Street Invaders that we can preserve? And one of those was like worship time and things. So we found a way to do worship online, and we found a way we came up with a COVID-friendly ministry sheet where kids could literally walk out of their home and still be ministering, even if that meant 2 meters from people. And it forced us to even get creative in how we think of evangelism, even as an evangelistic program. And so then those started building, and more people got involved, and more people started taking ownership. And we're like, okay, well, let's let's have a commissioning service. Let's commission these kids to go out even in their own towns and prophesy over them, and let's get churches involved and have churches run this. And so once we had the people there, it was really just the technical stuff that we had to figure out. And thank goodness we all knew how to work Zoom, so we just got Zoom going and tried to find a good balance for kids between them taking ownership and them receiving.
Yeah.
And and even I think it was really cool too. We got the chance to get some student leaders involved, and some students who would have maybe been assistant leaders this year, would have been involved, that maybe couldn't have been given them some responsibility. We had some students help teach, help run online teams. And once all those people were kind of in place, it just felt like the building blocks kept falling together. And we ended up with a 2.5-day program. Yeah, we had stuff on Zoom. We had some worship nights and things like that, and we even were able to have speakers from across the world because it was online. And we just empowered kids and students and leaders to just do ministry right from their home. So.
It's interesting. You built the plane and you flew it. And one thing that stood out to me from the whole situation and the whole, like, actually seeing it come to fruition, from the first prayers as the senior leadership of Street Invaders, we prayed that, God, if there is something from this that will then help us to be better at what we do and what our vision is for the future, it's yours, God. Like, open our eyes to that. And I found it very interesting that what we accomplished, what you just told me was what you felt came from it, was exactly what we try to get kids to understand all the time through our program, that they can do this at home, that they can go and affect their communities. And we've always kind of struggled to get them to understand that to the level that we were able to do this year by actually having them participate in the entire program from home. So cool.
So cool. And I think too, it even opened our eyes to see, like, Street Invaders doesn't just have to be in the summer. Right. And I think that was huge too. Like, we now have all the tools. Now that we've built the plane, we can fly it whenever we want, whatever time of the year. So I think it's, so cool how much, like, even just from like a box on my couch, how much bigger this got. And even the people involved and the people we were able to give leadership to, where just in the normal Street Invaders program, we don't have enough space yet for it. And this was all this new space to have people step up and lead and share. And I'm just really excited now for what this looks like for Street Invaders year round. So
absolutely. Okay. So as we finish off this podcast, from this last season that you have been through, I want you to share one thing that God has really taught you through this season, that you really feel you should share with our listeners today, in how, what He's shown you through going through Street Invaders in a Box, or whether it was something from youth pastoring through this pandemic. What do you want to leave with the listeners today?
I think the biggest thing that even I feel like I'm still learning and still walking in, and I kind of alluded to it, but is that with everything that's happening, is that what am I living for, and what is my ministry for? Is it so that other people around me can look at me and say, you're such a success, or is it to make room for the Lord to move in whatever He gives me, and for me to run with whatever He gives me, whether or not I know what that looks like, or if it's what I've experienced in the past? Because none of this has been for the last 6 months. Nothing I've gone through I've experienced, and so I just had to take what He's given me and run with it. And so I think that's the biggest thing for me is what am I doing with what He's given me, regardless of what anything else looks like around me or what anyone else is doing. How can I keep running towards the goal? And I think as well, just remembering that those small wins, those little things, those moments on Street Invaders in a Box where a student was touched, or even if there was a Friday night where I only had 3 kids show up, how was I able to pour into their lives at youth group? Or when I look at the students who've graduated, who we didn't even really get to celebrate that much, how are they thriving, and what are the wins in that? And despite all the obstacles, those wins are worth it, because that's what I've done with what the Lord has given me. And so that's probably the thing I'm still learning to walk in, but that I would leave the listeners with to encourage them. So.
Yeah, and just a report from the Street Invaders program this year. Tell us a little bit of the statistics that we are kind of getting in from what transpired this summer in the students' lives. How many kids do we have in any churches? Like, give me the lowdown on it.
Yeah, I think it's off the top of my head a little bit. I hope these are right, but we had about 30 students. We had 3 churches involved, and we've had people who never really been involved too. So that was really exciting. Mm-hmm. And we had students who, were prophesying for the first time. We had students who walked away from this saying, like, I know how to do this in my hometown now. We had students, we had one, we ran it at the church that I work at, and we just participated in the online program. And we had students who, during the commissioning service, were getting words that they'd been waiting for months, that were literally the very things that they had said to the Lord. Like, the very same words were said to them during the commissioning service. And so we had so many students just when I was reading the feedback that they gave us today, and over again, they were just like, it was so good to have people pour into me. I'm so excited now for what it looks like to walk this out at home. And so, definitely worth it. A lot of work, but definitely worth it to be able to just pour into those students this year. So
it's awesome. Well, I want to thank you for joining me today on our very first ACOP Ministry Mind podcast. I want to thank you also for all the work that you do in your local church, but also with our Next Gen lead team with ACOP, and just building initiative and helping people to feel connected and involved. And so, thank you so much for all that you do, and just for being an amazing go-getter, and you're just not afraid to take on any big challenge. I love it. You are an inspiration. So thanks for giving us your time today. And we are praying that God has so much more even for you in this next season. So bless you, and thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me, Kim. It was great.
Awesome. Okay, well, thanks for tuning in today, and we hope that you will join us again soon. Talk to you later.